What do you mean we're losing contracts over poor conditions? That's not possible, Quentin Nash said, tossing the report onto his desk, eyes narrowed. 15 locations. Over 200 employees. Quentin had built his commercial cleaning company from nothing but a rusted-out van and a mop 15 years ago. He knew every chemical, every floor buffer, every routine. But lately, something had been slipping. A few big clients had walked away. Exit surveys mentioned things like unreliable cleaning, worn-out tools, unprofessional behavior. His district manager, Theo, always had an answer. Staff shortages. High turnover. Equipment on back order. But Quentin wasn't buying it anymore. He leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. Maybe I've been gone too long. His assistant poked her head in. You asked to be notified when one of the downtown crews had a gap. Location 13 just had a new guy quit mid-shift. Manager says he's desperate. Quentin stood. Perfect. 2 days later, Quentin pulled into the back lot of Location 13 under a new name, Rick. He wore steel-toed boots, a plain blue hoodie, and a thick beard that had taken him months to grow out. He'd never met the team at this location. Between the chain growing fast and COVID scattering everything, he hadn't shaken hands with anyone here before. He walked in through the back, carrying a beat-up duffel bag. A wiry man in his 40s looked up from a clipboard. You Rick? Yeah, Quentin said. Supposed to start today.
Cool.
I'm Daryl. Supervisor. You're lucky, we're short again. You'll ride with Angel. She's been here a while. Knows her stuff. Quentin nodded. Another crew member, a petite woman with a high ponytail and tired eyes, waved him over. Grab a mop bucket. We go light today, 2 offices and 1 medical center. You ever done strip and wax? Once or twice, Quentin said, keeping it vague. Angel smirked.
Good.
Cause our buffer's trash. Daryl won't replace it. Quentin raised a brow. Why not? He says we gotta make do. Corporate's cutting costs or some bull, she muttered, loading supplies into the van. Inside, the van smelled like lemon cleaner and old rubber. Angel drove while chewing sunflower seeds. You from around here? Up north, Quentin said. Needed change. Heard this place was hiring. You'll see fast, she said. We work hard, but gear's falling apart. And Daryl? He shows up late, leaves early. Quentin kept quiet, watching everything. The first stop was a real estate office. The floors were sticky, and the old mop buckets squeaked like a dying animal. Angel muttered curses under her breath every time the buffer stalled. It sparked once. Quentin stepped back, startled. That thing's a fire hazard. Tell that to Daryl, she snapped. I already did. Twice. Back in the van, Angel rubbed her wrist. I've got tendinitis. That buffer kicks like a mule. But what choice do I have? Doesn't corporate care? Her laugh was bitter. We don't hear from them. Daryl filters everything. Tells us they say no to every request. Quentin's jaw tightened. You ever try going around him? You think we know who's up there? They don't talk to cleaners. He glanced at her. Someone should. She looked out the window.
Yeah.
Someone should. At the medical office, things got worse. The mop snapped near the base. Angel sighed and tossed it aside. Great. That was our last good one. Let's tell Daryl. They radioed him. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the lot, stepped out, and squinted at the mop. Not my problem, Daryl said. Y'all got another one at the warehouse. That one's cracked in half, Angel said. Then duct tape it. I'm not wasting company money over a stick. You expect us to clean a medical center with broken tools?
Quentin asked.
Daryl looked him up and down. You're new. You don't call shots.
You do what I say.
If you don't like it, walk. Quentin stared at him. You serious? Dead serious. We all gotta sacrifice. That's just how it is. Angel looked like she wanted to scream, but bit her tongue. We're risking injuries. Daryl shrugged. Not my problem. Quentin clenched his teeth. That moment struck him like a punch. This wasn't just bad management, this was dangerous. And it was happening under his name. He sat silent the rest of the drive. That night, he emailed himself a list of everything they were missing. But more than that, he couldn't stop thinking about one thing. How Angel kept working anyway. How she didn't walk. How she didn't scream. He was going to fix this. But not yet. Not until he saw how deep it went. The next morning started before sunrise. Quentin arrived early, parked at the edge of the lot, and watched as Angel dragged herself out of her beat-up sedan and leaned on the van door for a moment, staring blankly ahead. She didn't see him. Her shoulders hung low, and there was no movement in her expression, just a stillness that only came from exhaustion that had settled in long ago. She finally noticed him and gave a short nod as he approached. No one else showed up again, she said, pulling the keys from her coat pocket. We've got to cover a daycare and 2 clinics today, just us. Anyone call out?
No.
They quit. She didn't elaborate and he didn't push. Inside the van, she took a slow breath and started checking supplies. We're low on disinfectant again, she said, frowning at the half-empty container. I asked Daryl to order more last week. He said he did. Quentin looked at the label. It had expired 4 months ago. He reached for the radio mounted to the dash. Mind if I... Angel grabbed his wrist. Don't. If you push him too direct, he'll pull you off shift. I've seen it. Quentin paused. She let go and leaned back. We'll stretch it. I've got a stash of wipes I bought with my own money. They drove in silence for a while. The sun hadn't even cleared the buildings yet when they arrived at the daycare. Inside, the air carried a mix of fruit snacks, crayons, and sickness. Quentin noticed a rash of dried stains around the base of several cubbies. Angel dropped to her knees and started scrubbing. You ever clean a place with kids? Yeah, once, Quentin said, kneeling beside her. Toys were the worst part. Still are. They drool on everything. And we're not allowed to throw anything out even if it's cracked or moldy. Daryl says not our job. A woman in scrubs walked by them, holding a clipboard. She stopped short, looking at the bucket and cracked mop handles sticking out. Is that the same equipment you were using last month? Angel stood. Yes, ma'am. We've put in requests. The woman's expression hardened. I nearly failed your last audit. You know that, right? If the county shows up unannounced and I've got blood pathogens and no documented sanitation. We're doing our best, Angel said, voice low but steady. The woman looked at Quentin. You knew?
Yeah.
Hate to break it to you, but unless things change, you won't want to stay long. They left over an hour later, shoulders sore and gloves stained. Back in the van, Angel sat in the driver's seat, not starting it. She stared straight ahead. I've been doing this 6 years, she said quietly. Never had a raise. Not once. You serious? Daryl says the company's barely staying afloat. Says we should be grateful we're not laid off. Quentin looked at her. You ever contact payroll directly? She shook her head. He said that's against protocol. Everything goes through him. Quentin leaned back. His thoughts were sprinting now, contracts lost, complaints stacking up, and the same guy bottlenecking everything. He remembered how Theo had mentioned Daryl in passing a few times. Takes initiative, Theo had said. Keeps things lean. They reached the first clinic just after 10. It was the biggest stop of the day, a 3-floor facility with heavy foot traffic. Quentin carried an overstuffed trash bag down a stairwell when he saw a man in a red polo leaning against the wall, scrolling his phone. You with us?
Quentin asked.
The man looked up lazily.
Nah, I'm float.
Daryl said, I could chill down here while you guys finish the top floors. Float. Yeah, the man said, shrugging. He said y'all had it handled. Quentin stared at him. What's your name? Marcus. You knew.
Yeah,
Thought we were short-staffed. Marcus laughed.
we are.
I just don't care anymore. Daryl doesn't either. Long as I clock in, he signs off. He's got me covering 3 sites this week. You think I'm hitting all of them? Quentin dropped the bag on the ground and walked away. Angel was midway through wiping down a surgical prep area. There's a guy downstairs doing nothing, he said quietly. She didn't look up.
Yeah,
Marcus. This normal. More than it should be. He watched her scrub a dried smear from the side of a stainless steel cabinet. She was using a rag that had clearly been washed too many times, its threads frayed, the edges curling. I need to talk to Theo, Quentin said. Angel looked up for the first time in minutes. You'll never get through. Daryl filters all calls. Tells him everything's fine. Quentin narrowed his eyes. You ever try writing a letter? She gave a dry laugh. You think I haven't? They finished the last clinic around 3. The sun was high, and Quentin's back ached from hauling bags up narrow stairwells. He noticed Angel was limping slightly as they returned to the van. You all right? Old injury, she said. Slipped on a wet floor 3 years ago. No workers' comp. Daryl said it was my fault. Quentin stopped walking.
wait.
You filed a report, right? He never turned it in. Said I didn't follow protocol. I didn't even know there was a form. He felt his pulse spike. Did you talk to HR? We don't even have an HR contact. Daryl tells us to email the general inbox. Back at the warehouse, they unloaded the van in silence. Inside, Marcus lounged on a plastic chair, scrolling his phone again. You done already? He asked without looking up. Quentin walked past him, jaw tight. Later that night, Quentin sat in his car across the street from the warehouse, writing down names, dates, and everything he'd seen in the last 2 days. He made a list of all the payroll discrepancies Angel had mentioned. He added Marcus to a separate column labeled non-compliance. At the bottom, he wrote, Daryl complete operational control, no oversight. Filters information. Possibly misappropriating funds. He stared at the list. Somewhere along the way, the company had shifted. The systems he'd put in place were still there on paper, but the people enforcing them had twisted their purpose. There was no excuse for workers buying their own supplies. No excuse for someone like Angel working for years without a raise, or being denied basic injury protection. Quentin closed the notebook, locked it in the glove compartment, and started the engine. Tomorrow, he'd visit the other warehouse. If this was isolated, he could fix it. If it wasn't, then it was bigger than just Daryl. But either way, the days of people like Marcus collecting paychecks for doing nothing and supervisors like Daryl silencing the people doing everything were numbered. Quentin arrived at the East Side warehouse just before dawn, head down, hoodie up. A different crew, a different district, but the same logo on the van. This time, he was paired with a guy named Luis, early 20s, fast-talking and constantly watching the clock. They had a floor-to-ceiling glass office on their schedule and a warehouse floor with oil-stained concrete. Don't let the glass fool you, Luis said, loading up supplies. That place is worse than it looks. You ever done high windows? Yeah, Quentin said, lifting a bucket onto the van floor. You got poles for those?
Luis laughed.
We used to. Someone broke the last one. We've been using a stepladder and guesswork ever since. Quentin raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. Luis climbed into the driver's seat, already tapping on the GPS. By noon, Quentin had been up and down that ladder a dozen times, trying to get streaks off windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Halfway through, he noticed something strange. A man in a company jacket watching them from across the street, leaning against a black SUV. He wasn't part of their crew. Hey, Luis, Quentin said, wiping sweat off his brow. Who's the guy with the SUV? Luis didn't look up. That's Theo, district manager. Shows up once every couple weeks to check in. Usually just talks to the building manager and leaves. He doesn't say much to us. Theo didn't approach them. He made a phone call, then got back in his car and drove off. Luis didn't seem surprised. He only talks to site managers anyway, Luis said, loading the ladder back into the van. I've never seen him actually clean anything. They drove to the second job, a shipping warehouse with grease-coated floors and overflowing garbage bins. Luis rolled his neck, cracked his knuckles, and leaned against the van. We're supposed to sweep all this before we mop, he said, gesturing at a pile of loose plastic and dust. But I'm not doing that by hand. We had a floor sweeper, but our manager took it home. Quentin blinked. He took it home?
Yeah.
Said he was gonna fix it. That was 3 weeks ago. Inside, the air was thick with chemical fumes and diesel. Quentin noticed 2 women working near the back, pushing mops across the floor with slow, deliberate motions. One had her wrist wrapped in an old bandage. The other walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. You work with them often?
Quentin asked.
Only when we're short, Luis said. They're part-time. Don't speak much English. The woman with the bandaged wrist waved as they passed. Quentin nodded in return, then turned to Luis. They on payroll? Luis shrugged. I think so. They get paid cash, sometimes. I don't ask. Quentin stopped walking. What do you mean cash? Manager says it's easier that way. No paperwork, no taxes. Faster. Quentin exhaled slowly, then picked up a broom. He swept the floor himself, watching as Luis leaned against a crate and pulled out his phone. After 10 minutes, Quentin walked over. You gonna help or just supervise? Luis laughed, not moving. Don't strain yourself, man. This place doesn't care how clean it is, long as it looks halfway decent when the boss walks through. Quentin looked him over. You know anyone who's been promoted here? Luis pocketed his phone. Promoted? Man, this isn't that kind of job. People come, people go. You put in your hours and hope your check clears. After the job, they returned the van to the warehouse. The manager, a stocky man in pressed khakis, was sitting in the office with the door open. He looked up when they walked in. How'd the glass office look? He asked. Luis flopped into a chair. Good enough. We skipped the front panel, too many people walking in and out. The manager didn't react. All right. Mark it as finished. I'll sign off. Quentin watched him closely. Do you have a list of replacement equipment? We're missing a floor sweeper. The manager looked at him, expression flat. We don't replace until something is completely unusable. That's policy. It's been gone for 3 weeks. He stood up, arms crossed. And we're still delivering service, right? We're not a charity. If you can't adapt, this isn't the job for you. Quentin stared at him. You took company equipment home. The manager's jaw tightened. You got a problem with how I run my site?
Luis stood slowly.
Hey man, maybe he's up. He's new. I don't care if he's new, the manager said. He doesn't walk in here asking questions like he owns the place. Quentin stepped forward. Actually, he pulled the badge from his back pocket, flipping it open. The room went dead silent. My name is Quentin Nash. I founded this company. And I've spent the last week working undercover because I stopped trusting the reports I was getting. Luis stumbled back a step. The manager's face drained of color. Here's what I've seen, Quentin continued. Workers being paid under the table. Injured employees ignored. Equipment hoarded. Managers not working. Supervisors silencing complaints. And people like Angel who you don't even know breaking their backs while you sit in a chair. He turned to Luis. You'll stay for a meeting tomorrow. I want names of every employee doing their job. And I want receipts for every missing tool.
Luis nodded, stunned.
The manager opened his mouth. You're done, Quentin said. Effective immediately. You've endangered employees, misrepresented hours, and withheld company property. You'll be escorted out today. Warehouse staff had started gathering near the office, watching the scene unfold.
Quentin turned to them.
Anyone who's been passed over for raises, denied safety gear, or told to stay quiet, I want you in this office tomorrow morning. You'll be paid for your time. Someone clapped once, then stopped. No one moved.
Quentin looked around.
If you've been working hard, I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to rebuild this company around you. He walked past the stunned crowd, out into the cold sun, and into his car. He didn't drive away. He opened his laptop and sent a single message to Theo. Warehouse manager East Side terminated for cause. Payroll and equipment audit begins tomorrow. I'll be sitting in. He leaned back in his seat, staring through the windshield. The damage was worse than he thought, but the path forward was clear. No more silence. No more middlemen filtering truth. Tomorrow, he'd call Angel, not as Rick, as the man who built the company and was ready to fight for it again. The next morning, Quentin arrived at the downtown office before sunrise. This time, he wore his company badge on his jacket.
No hoodie. No disguise.
No more pretending. He walked straight into the staff room. Angel was sorting through a stack of microfiber cloths near the sink, her movements stiff. She looked up, startled. Yeah, Quentin said. I'm not Rick.
I'm Quentin Nash.
I started this company 15 years ago. I've been undercover the last week, trying to understand what went wrong. Angel didn't speak. Her face was unreadable. I saw what you've been dealing with, Quentin continued. And I'm not here to make excuses. I let things drift too far from what this was supposed to be. Angel kept her eyes on him. Why now? I stopped trusting the reports I was getting. I needed to see it myself. She folded the cloth slowly. So, what happens now? First, Daryl's out. Effective immediately. We'll be replacing him with someone who actually listens. Angel's hands froze mid-motion. You mean it? I've already made the call. He won't be back in this building. And you're not going back out today. You're meeting with me, and we're going over every job site you've covered in the last 6 months. You're going to tell me who's been pulling the weight and who hasn't. Angel sat down without a word. Her hands dropped into her lap. Quentin turned to the rest of the morning crew, who had started trickling in, still unsure whether to believe what they were seeing. No one's losing hours today, Quentin said. You're all being paid for this meeting. I want to hear what's actually happening at each site. We're not going back to business as usual. By mid-morning, they'd moved the meeting to the break room in the warehouse. More employees had arrived, some skeptical, some openly relieved. Quentin stood at the front with a legal pad. Behind him, a whiteboard listed locations, work orders, and missing equipment. Luis showed up around 9, eyes lowered, hands in his pockets. I wasn't sure if I should come, he said. You showed up, Quentin replied. That's step 1. Step 2 is honesty. Luis nodded once and sat down. Quentin pointed to the board. Let's start with the basics. Who hasn't had a working mop bucket in the last 3 weeks? Nearly every hand went up. He kept going. Who's been asked to cover more than 2 locations in a single shift? Half the room. Who's been asked to pay for their own supplies? Angel spoke up. I bought gloves and wipes 3 times last month. No reimbursement. Quentin wrote it down. That changes today. You'll get full reimbursement for every item you've logged. And if anyone else has receipts, bring them to me directly. When the discussion shifted to unpaid overtime and missing gear, one of the older staff members, Manny, cleared his throat. This place used to be different, he said. When I started, we had monthly check-ins, working gear, regular raises. Somewhere along the way, the only people getting more were the ones doing the least. Quentin nodded. That's on me. I trusted the wrong people to protect the culture we built. That ends this week. He turned to Angel. You've been managing half the city's workload without the title or the support. Starting next week, you're moving into a field supervisor role. Full benefits. Base salary plus mileage. You'll be in charge of resupplying vans and field-checking job sites. She blinked. I didn't ask for that.
You earned it, he said.
And I need someone who knows what's really happening out there. Luis raised his hand hesitantly. I wasn't doing my part, he said. I took shortcuts. I figured, why push if no one cares? Quentin met his eyes. You own it. That matters. You want to stay? If I can do it right this time. Then you stay. But you start over. You'll be shadowing Angel for the next 2 weeks. If she clears you, you're back on full rotation.
Luis nodded.
By late morning, their list of issues had tripled. Quentin had 2 phones going, one for logistics, the other for payroll corrections. He'd already contacted a regional equipment supplier to rush order new buffers, mop heads, and vacuums. The warehouse crew had begun clearing space for the incoming stock. At noon, a man in a brown blazer arrived from corporate accounting. He walked in with a folder tucked under his arm and scanned the room. Mr. Nash, I've pulled the last 6 months of payroll records from locations 13 to 16. There are discrepancies. Quentin took the folder. How bad? Several employees listed as full-time have no overtime logged. Some haven't been paid for hours they clocked. And there are at least 4 who aren't in the system at all. Cash payments? Looks like it. Angel stepped forward. There were 2 women we worked with at the clinic. Never spoke in meetings. Always left early. Quentin turned to the accountant. Get me their names. I want them on record, paid correctly, and given their rightful status. The accountant nodded and left. At 1, a regional HR rep arrived. Quentin pulled her aside. Anyone who experienced injury without proper reporting gets a retroactive review. We're reopening every closed case flagged by field staff. The HR rep hesitated. This goes back years. Then we go back years.
No exceptions.
That afternoon, an emergency managers meeting was held across town. Only 2 supervisors showed up. The rest had either been terminated or placed on leave pending investigation. Quentin stood at the head of the long table, hands resting on a folder filled with employee reports. This company was built on pride in your work. Somewhere along the way, that got replaced by excuses and shortcuts. I'm not interested in excuses anymore. One of the remaining managers tried to interject. I didn't know they were using expired disinfectant. That was, you were responsible for ordering it, Quentin said. And you signed off on the inventory sheets. The manager fell quiet. Quentin turned to the other. You filed a complaint last month about Daryl. It never reached me.
Why?
I was told I had to go through Theo. That chain's broken now. Moving forward, you report directly to my new operations liaison. Every concern gets logged. Every complaint gets tracked. By end of day, 27 employees had been issued back pay. 4 managers were dismissed. 2 new field supervisors were appointed, including Angel. The office's old strip buffer was hauled out and replaced with a new motorized unit. Employees tested it before signing off. As the sun dipped below the buildings, Quentin stood by the warehouse dock watching the first shipment of new equipment roll in. Angel walked up beside him, arms crossed. You planning to do this again? Go undercover. If I have to, he said. But I'd rather build something where I don't need to. She nodded once. It's going to take time. People are still waiting to see if this sticks. I know. That's why I'm staying local for a while. She looked over at the crew unloading boxes. For the first time since he'd met her, her posture had changed. Not relaxed exactly, but steady. You're not the guy I expected, she said. Neither are you, Quentin replied. That's why this place is going to survive. He didn't make a speech. He didn't promise it would all be perfect. But he stayed until the last box was inside, until the last work order was logged, and until every employee had clocked out with the time they'd actually worked. And for the first time in a long time, the company felt like his again. Not because his name was on the paperwork, but because people who cared were finally being heard.